All right, wizards. So here's another problem from those 5 questions that were on My Open Math today. We probably did not get to them, but again, I'm going to approach this the same way as before. We're going to solve this problem in 2 ways. First, we'll take a confidence interval approach. So remember, when we take a confidence interval approach, when we use a confidence interval, everything is based on the sample, and in particular, p hat. So we will begin. We're going to check our conditions for using a confidence interval. The 2016 adults were randomly selected. It says it right there that the Harris poll randomly sampled 2016 adults. Out of those 2016 adults, 4,023 had 1 or more tattoos, which means 1,593 did not. Both of those are greater than 10, so our sample is certainly large enough to use a normal model. And again, the third condition is sometimes checked by the AP grader, sometimes not, but the 2016 people randomly sampled is certainly less than 10% of all adults. So it appears that all 3 of the conditions have been met. And so the model we are using, the model is going to be based on p hat. So we will use p hat to build our model, and the model we're going to use has a mean of 0.21 and a standard error of 0.009. And that is called the standard error because it is coming from our proportion. So when we construct a 90% confidence interval, what I want to do is I want to take my normal model and I want to kind of figure out the endpoints for the middle 90%. So there is 5% on the outside over here and 5% on the outside over there. And remember, to find those, I use inverse normal, and I use 0.05 for my area. I use 0 for the mean and 1 for the standard deviation. And that would give me an answer of negative 1.645. And so we just use the absolute value of that for our special z-score. And so this is my confidence interval, and here it is written in interval notation. And so can we conclude that the percentage of adults who have a tattoo is less than 25%? And yes, we can. According to our interval, we are 90% confident that the true population proportion of adults who have a tattoo is somewhere in this interval. That interval lies entirely below 25%. On a number line, both of these numbers are less than 0.25. So we have evidence to suggest that actually the population proportion is somewhat less than 25%. So if I was to interpret my confidence interval in context, you're going to be asked to interpret things all the time, and this is one of the things we will do at the very end of our problems with confidence intervals. I am 90% confident that the true population proportion of adults with 1 or more tattoos is between 0.195 and 22.5, or if you are more comfortable with percents, somewhere between 19.5% and 22.5% of adults have 1 or more tattoos. And so explain what 90% confidence means in this context. So if you repeatedly took samples of size 2016, the same size, from the same population, if you built confidence intervals for each one of those samples, about 90% of those confidence intervals would contain the true population proportion. That's what 90% confidence means. If I take a sample and build a confidence interval, it may or may not contain the true proportion. I don't know if mine does or does not, but I do know that 90% of them should. And if I want to make my interval narrower, there are 2 things you could do. You could leave the sample size alone and make the confidence interval smaller, or you could leave the confidence interval alone, or the confidence level alone, and you could make the sample size larger. So those are the 2 things that you could do to make the interval narrower. Compare that to the other video about confidence intervals where we tried to make the interval wider. So you've got a couple videos to watch, and hopefully these things are helpful. And if you have any questions about them, ask me in class tomorrow, or if we have no school tomorrow, on Thursday. I hope this has been helpful.